Darrell pulled into the lot of Prestige Motors, his latest acquisition nestled in the heart of Scottsdale, Arizona. The sun glared off the windshields of the showroom's pristine luxury cars, each one a testament to wealth and sophistication. Unlike the customers who typically graced these premises, Darrell wasn't arriving in an exotic sports car or a chauffeur-driven limousine. His modest SUV blended into the background as he parked in an unmarked spot at the far end of the lot. He wanted to remain unnoticed, an observer rather than a spectacle. Stepping out, he took in the sight of the dealership's glass facade, the bold lettering of its name exuding an air of exclusivity. His attire, however, told a different story. A simple gray hoodie, slightly worn jeans, and sneakers, hardly the image of a man with significant financial influence. But that was exactly the point. He wanted to see how things operated when no one knew the new owner was watching. As he approached the entrance, the automatic doors slid open, allowing the cool embrace of air conditioning to wash over him. The scent of leather and fresh wax was thick in the air. He took a slow, deliberate look around. The floor was polished to perfection, gleaming under the bright showroom lights. Rows of high-end vehicles stood proudly on display, their gleaming exteriors promising prestige to anyone willing to pay the price. Near the front desk, a cluster of employees engaged in casual chatter. Their laughter hummed in the background, the easy camaraderie suggesting they were comfortable in their environment. As Darrell stepped inside, the mood shifted. Conversations grew quieter, glances were exchanged, and subtle assessments were made. His hoodie and sneakers were noted. Judgments were formed in an instant. Then she appeared. Susan. She walked toward him with purpose, a woman who commanded her space with an air of authority. Her sharp features were accentuated by a tailored blazer, her polished heels clicking against the pristine floor with each step. A clipboard was tucked under her arm, the universal symbol of someone with a schedule to keep and little patience for detours. Her smile, though polite, didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," she said, her tone cool and professional. "Can I help you with something?" Darrell returned her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Just here to look around," he replied, his tone casual as he gestured toward the luxury vehicles surrounding them. Susan's eyes flicked over him, taking in the details of his appearance. There was a slight shift in her demeanor, a tightening of her posture. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked, the doubt in her voice barely concealed. Darrell nodded, offering a small smile. "Something like that." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, we cater to a very specific clientele here," she said. "Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification. Perhaps I could recommend." Before she could finish, another employee called out to her. "Hey Susan, the delivery guy is here." For a brief moment her attention wavered, but she quickly refocused on Darrell, as if making sure he wouldn't wander too far. Darrell raised an eyebrow. "You're assuming I'm not qualified." Susan hesitated, but only for a fraction of a second. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she said, her smile forced. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to." Darrell let the moment linger. He noted her choice of words, the subtle but undeniable assumptions that underpinned them. He let out a breath and turned his gaze toward one of the cars nearby, a sleek silver coupe with aggressive lines and an unmistakable presence. He reached out, letting his fingers graze the door handle. "Nice car," he mused. Susan's expression tightened. "It is. Perhaps when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment. For now, I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles." Darrell withdrew his hand, slipping it back into his pocket. He studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "All right," he said. "Let's hear it. What would you recommend for someone like me?" Susan blinked, caught off guard by the question. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, "Maybe something a little more budget-friendly. I can give you directions to a dealership that specializes in pre-owned vehicles." Darrell smiled faintly. It didn't reach his eyes. "That's quite the assumption." For the first time, Susan faltered. A brief flicker of uncertainty passed across her face before she quickly composed herself. "I'll be back with a list of options," she said briskly before walking away. Darrell watched her go, his expression unreadable. He turned back to the silver coupe, catching his reflection in its glossy finish. This was going to be an interesting day. Minutes later, Susan returned, clipboard in hand, her movements brisk and businesslike. "I've compiled a few options that might be more suitable for your situation," she said, holding out a printout. Daryl took the sheet and scanned the list. A used sedan, an older SUV, a compact hybrid, all well below the typical price range of Prestige Motors' usual offerings. His lips twitched in amusement, though he quickly hid it, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "Appreciate the effort," he said evenly. Susan, perhaps expecting a different reaction, hesitated. Then, lowering her voice slightly, she added, "Look, I'm just trying to be realistic with you. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Daryl met her gaze, his expression calm. "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your target customer?" Susan hesitated again, but recovered quickly. "I've been doing this a long time," she said. "I can tell when someone's out of their depth." "Out of their depth," Daryl repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting." Something in his tone made Susan shift slightly, as though realizing too late that she may have misjudged the situation. But she pressed on. "I'm just being honest. It's better to be upfront than to have someone leave disappointed." Daryl let out a soft chuckle. "Honest, huh? I like honesty. How about this? You let me speak to the owner. Think we can make that happen?" Susan's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. "The owner." "That's right," Daryl said, his tone light, almost conversational. "I'd like to have a word with them." Susan's lips twitched into an uneasy smile. "Well, that's not possible today. The owner doesn't just drop by for casual visits. They're a busy person." "I'm sure they are," Daryl said. "But maybe you could give them a call, let them know I'm here. I think they'd want to meet me." Susan's smile tightened. "Look, sir, I'm trying to be as polite as possible, but this is getting ridiculous. I have other customers to attend to, if you're serious about buying a car." Before she could finish, a deep voice interrupted her from across the showroom. "Susan." She turned sharply. Her expression shifted from mild irritation to sheer disbelief as the dealership's general manager strode toward them, his face a mask of barely contained panic. "Mr. Sinclair," he said breathlessly. We weren't expecting you today." Susan froze. Daryl smiled. "Oh, but I do enjoy casual visits," he said. "After all, I like to see how things run when no one knows the owner is watching." Alex walked into the dealership, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. The air carried a mix of new leather, polished chrome, and the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee. Employees bustled around, some engaged in hushed conversations, while others handled paperwork behind the sleek counters. The atmosphere was routine until he arrived. The moment Alex stepped through the doors, the room collectively stiffened. Conversations died mid-sentence, eyes subtly but unmistakably darting in his direction. Susan, clipboard in hand, nearly lost her grip on it. Her fingers clenched around the edges as if steadying herself from an unseen impact. Her eyes flicked between Daryl and Alex, her brow furrowing in confusion. The dealership's regional director stood poised, his usual composed expression shifting to something unreadable. Susan's mouth opened slightly, her uncertainty hanging thick in the air. "Wait, Mr. Carter." Her voice was barely above a whisper, as though she had spoken without realizing it. Alex turned to her, his typically friendly demeanor sharpening into something more professional. "Susan," he acknowledged with a clipped nod. "I see you've already met Mr. Carter." She blinked rapidly, her lips parting, then pressing shut again. I didn't realize." "Didn't realize." Alex interjected, his voice even but carrying a weight that settled heavily over the room. "Didn't realize he's the new owner of this dealership." His gaze was steady, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Susan paled, her breath hitching. Her clipboard, once a casual accessory, now seemed like a shield she clutched tightly against her chest. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know." Daryl's expression remained unreadable. "Didn't know what?" His voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, controlled yet firm. Susan swallowed hard. "I didn't mean." Daryl held up a hand, cutting her off. "It's fine, Susan, really." He took a measured step forward, lowering his voice just enough that the entire room instinctively leaned in. But let me ask you something. If I hadn't been the owner, would you have treated me any differently? Would I have been given the same respect as someone who walked in here wearing a suit and tie? Silence. The weight of it pressed against every person in the room. Susan's lips parted, but no words came out. Daryl nodded, as though her silence was answer enough. He turned to Alex, his voice carrying newfound authority. Let's gather everyone in the conference room. I think it's time we had a conversation about how things are run around here. Employees filed into the sleek conference room, the tension following them like a lingering shadow. The room, usually a place of strategy and high-level discussions, now felt heavier than usual. The glass walls, the polished wooden table, the neatly arranged chairs, all of it seemed to bear witness to an unspoken reckoning. Susan chose a seat near the back, her posture rigid, her fingers gripping her pen like a lifeline. The usual confidence she exuded was absent. She was quiet, her gaze flitting between Daryl and the other employees, her mind replaying the last few minutes on a loop. Daryl took his place at the head of the table, his expression calm but commanding. Alex stood near the door, arms crossed, his observant gaze taking in every reaction, every whisper, every shift in body language. The murmurs of hushed conversations died down as Daryl cleared his throat. Thank you all for joining me on short notice, he began, his voice steady, even. For those who don't know, my name is Daryl Carter, and as of last month, I'm the new owner of Prestige Motors. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. A few employees exchanged glances, some intrigued, others embarrassed. Susan sank lower in her chair, her usual air of authority diminished. I came here today dressed casually for a reason, Daryl continued, his hands resting lightly on the table. I wanted to see how this dealership operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to experience what a potential customer might feel walking through these doors. His pause was deliberate, allowing the weight of his words to settle. What I experienced today was disappointing. I was judged not for my character, not for what I could bring to the table, but for how I looked. And this isn't just about me. It's about every person who walks through those doors, every customer who doesn't fit into someone's preconceived notion of what a luxury car buyer looks like. One of the younger sales associates hesitantly raised his hand. Daryl nodded toward him. Go ahead. Mr. Carter, the man began, his voice tentative. I think most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes it's hard not to make assumptions. Daryl nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that we all have biases whether we want to admit it or not, but here's the thing, it's not enough to just try to be fair. We have to actively challenge those biases. We have to create an environment where everyone feels respected, regardless of their appearance, background, or anything else. He let the message sink in before continuing. This dealership has built a reputation for excellence, but excellence isn't just about the cars we sell. It's about the experience we provide. And from now on, that experience is going to be built on respect, inclusivity, and fairness. The room was silent. The usual tension had shifted, no longer fear, but something more introspective. Daryl's gaze settled on Susan. Susan, he said gently but firmly, I want to give you the opportunity to speak. Is there anything you'd like to say? All eyes turned to her. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her pen. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I made a mistake, she admitted. I misjudged you, and for that I'm truly sorry. Daryl nodded. Thank you for saying that. I hope this experience will serve as a reminder for all of us, not just you, because change starts with accountability. He straightened. Moving forward, we'll be implementing new training programs to ensure this dealership represents the values I believe in. Every customer deserves to be treated with dignity. No exceptions. If anyone has an issue with that, now's the time to speak up. Silence. Daryl let it stretch just long enough. Then he spoke again, his voice unwavering. Good change isn't always easy, but it's necessary, and this dealership is going to lead by example. He took a step back, his eyes scanning the room one last time. All right then, let's get back to work, and remember, how we treat people matters more than anything we sell. As employees began to file out, Daryl caught Susan lingering near the door. She hesitated before stepping forward. Mr. Carter. He met her gaze evenly. Yes. She swallowed. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. Daryl nodded. We all deserve the chance to do better. Make the most of it.